What's going on, guys? Welcome back. More commentary here with Neal Bauer. I want to talk about some more simulation football, but we wanted to go in a different direction than we had in the past couple of videos. Do us a favor. Do me a favor. I don't know, either one of us. Hit the like button, subscribe button, criticism in the comment section. Twitter, Shutdown Safety is my username. He's Double Plus Good Games on Twitter, by the way, and we're going to talk about Backbreaker, and this was inspired by you. I was actually sifting around through the internet and YouTube, and I found a link in the description to this. Will be a clip of you playing Backbreaker, which ironically featured live gameplay, much the way I do it. And I noted that you, I believe, threw 2 interceptions back to back, which is almost what you did in Axis Football. It must be some type of new game, new football break-in mode for you to throw 2 interceptions. That's very nice.
That's how you know a game's a good game. If I can actually throw 2 interceptions in a row, it's a very realistic football game.
So I think we should set up a live stream, Madden 16, Neal Bauer. If the first 2 plays aren't interceptions on your offensive drives, we know it's a dud.
Sure. There you go. But I still, even if they are interceptions, I won't feel like I had any control over that.
No, touche. So Backbreaker, 5 years ago now,
Unbelievable.
is a game. I know, unbelievable, right? Really is unbelievable. It's been that long. It is a game, obviously, that I did a lot of work with. That you obviously, played and spent some time with. It's interesting to me when we think back on the game, having it been so long, so many consoles ago. Some of the things that it really brought to the marketplace that are things now that we talk about being so important to football. You think about, obviously, one of the most impressive logo creators that I've ever seen in a football game. You talk about the way it was customizable. I think it actually even came with, over 90-some teams. The way you could go in and create and edit franchises and seasons. And really, in my opinion, it had unlimited seasons. Now, I know that it didn't have, free agency. You kind of got stuck scouting. You really couldn't trade. But it really left a lot of things open to the consumer and the end users. And these are a lot of the things that we look for now as a community as staples. Aside from the physics engine, these are things that we ask for that have to be included in games for us to feel like they can be successful.
Well, you kind of glanced over the engine. I know we're going to talk about that, but I absolutely agree that the customization that they had in the game was fantastic for a rookie for its inaugural season. It was incredible, like the amount of content that was in it. And then, of course, it was built upon that natural motion engine, which had originally been teased prior to the knowledge of this game, that we had assumed was going to be used by, either it was going to be purchased by EA to be used in Madden, or some other company was going to make a football game. So I had been following natural motion and its Euphoria engine for since 2000. It's got to be since 2007, which is crazy. It would be that long. That's almost a decade old.
Yes, yeah, they started teasing the game. I distinctly recall they started teasing it around 2007, 2008, because there was that long 2-year window. And I've told people, several, I don't want to say ironic stories about Backbreaker, but I'll share one real quick. When the Great House patch was out, they had actually, I forget the actual terminology for what they'd done to my Xbox, but they had kind of connected me to them. You'll probably know better than I. They'd actually connected me to them where I could get like direct updates from Natural Motion and 505. I was actually working on the patch and going through the video, which I actually think got taken down because of some copyright infringement, for the Great House patch to I don't want to say promote it because people will take that as the wrong word, but they had asked, since I had spent so much time telling them what needed to be improved and taking feedback from the community, that it would be best suited if I showed people what had been fixed. And the only way I knew how to do that at the time was in a short condensed trailer that went through one scene, so to speak, of every improvement. I was on a forum, which will remain nameless, that was saying that this patch did not exist. There was no way that this was a patch. This was all just a hoax and a marketing scheme for people to buy the game. That there was no way they could make these these noted improvements. I'm literally sitting there playing the game with the patch as they spoke.
We actually had a whole podcast episode dedicated to that upgrade. That was an unbelievable patch. And for a rookie, again, to come out of the woodwork and to deliver a football game and trust me, I have worked in the industry long enough to know 505. Their track record is not solid as a publisher. So when this game came out and it was what it was, I'm like, it's all right. It's okay. I can't wait till next year's iteration if there's going to be next year's. But when Great House came in, the amount of upgrades that came in were ridiculous, through the roof. I had not seen a game transform as much. Well, up until I'd say Driveclub on the PS4. Now I don't know if you follow Driveclub at all, but it launched and it was horrific. The launch was terrible. First off, it was supposed to be a free PS Plus upgrade or PS Plus title. That didn't happen until a year after it was promised. But the game launched. It was buggy. The servers didn't work. There were so many issues prevalent with that game. But it took what they did after that, what the developers did, turned around and made it one of the greatest racing titles on the market. I do believe that the team behind Backbreaker did something very similar in a much shorter amount of time with Backbreaker. That Great House patch was unbelievable.
Another crazy concept with Backbreaker is the plays, from what I've been told. I can't verify this, but I mean, several developers that worked on the game acknowledged this was true. Several well, actually, two individuals, and keep in mind this was not an American producer-based game. Two people wrote every single play in that game, offensive and defense, and they actually used an NFL replay type system to go back through and watch the Colts plays and then basically write out what the play was and then use those as the passing and run plays. So many of those passing plays, especially the levels concepts, actually came from the Colts playbooks by just them looking at NFL film and translating that into the game. But to think about two people writing all the plays in that game boggles my mind.
You would know more on a one-to-one basis of what happened. But what I saw happen was that the game was delivered and Destructoid and GameSpot and IGN all like reveled in trashing it because it made them look good to EA, the game wasn't phenomenal at launch. We have had 2K5 to use as a benchmark aside from Madden. That was only a couple years old, but when the game got improved, nobody would touch it. And that game, I believe that they suffered from not only that 505 was a difficult company to work with from a PR perspective, but they were doing some great things, and I don't think the community really. There was a forum and there was a couple other things here, but I don't really think the community came to their aid as much as they should. They should, and again, I don't want to. I wasn't part of that community. I had my own thing going. I was talking to my audiences. I was actually physically buying copies. I bought at least 8 copies of that game. I think I may have shared that with you. I was buying copies of that game to give away on the show, and I gave 2 to our developers here, and was handing them out to people on the show just to get their hands on the game. I still own my PS3 and Xbox version here. The game is still one of the most fun physics-based games that I have. I find it thoroughly enjoyable to still pick up and play. I don't know if you touch it, but
They hurt themselves, in my opinion, in 2 aspects. A lot of the problems they had subsequent to why Backbreaker 2, at least from a gaming console, wasn't put out was, as you said, the initial negative reaction to the game was so overwhelming that I feel like once, no matter how great, no pun intended, the Great House patch was going to be, you had damaged so many people to the game that they weren't willing to pick it back up. And I actually think the game, in my opinion, gets a bit of a negative rap. If we think about what it was sold on, and you touched on it before with the Euphoria engine, it really did deliver. How many times do we have games now that come out, and I don't want to, obviously call out the elephant in the room with Madden, but they'll call out, some features and some things that are supposed to be in the game, and they turn out to maybe not be as cleanly in the game as they're advertised. With Backbreaker, the physics engine was there. Did it do some wonky things now and again? Absolutely. But no 2 tackles were the same. That game utilized the engine to its full advantage. The other thing that I always found interesting was you had Tackle Alley, which was basically their stance. And I remember speaking to Rob Donald about this very specifically. He looked at Tackle Alley as almost an arcade aspect of the game, where when you wanted time apart from what they thought was a simulation football game, that you could go into Tackle Alley. And I remember that he talked about how few people actually completed all 100 levels. I think it was maybe like 1% or something of all the people that played the game actually was successful enough to get all the way through that. And I think if you look in that in Madden perspective, there's not any Madden objective or goal or mini game where you can subjectively say this is so difficult or this is so different from the actual game that only 1% of the people that play this thing are going to actually complete it. It was interesting to me that they were able to set those goals, and they're pretty lofty, but actually come through and have them in the final product. And I don't think enough people actually look at that for what it's worth and what it is.
And I will say that I enjoyed Tackle Alley for what it was, but there were my two big negatives about the game, and these are petty, and these are from me. Is when I first saw them developing a football game, I was so excited, and I clicked on the first video, and they were all from the UK. That shocked me to no end. And I said, how are people from the UK going to make a football game? So I already had like one eyebrow raised at this point of how they're going to do it. And then when the game was delivered, it was so. One of the things that bothered me is I think the community actually asked for them to bring a camera. Maybe it was even you that said, "Will you move that camera back, please? Just give us another step up." And they said, "No, we are not doing that." And so at those two things really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But again, almost everything was forgiven with that Great House patch. Uh, it's just I think you're right. By then it was too little, too late.
Well, they fell on the sword. I mean, they certainly did. I don't know one person who didn't play the game and at least have some desire to see what it was like to actually have a pan-out cam. And if you recall, when the game first came out, one of the biggest things I said that they had to fix instantaneously was the replay. The replay was actually locked, where it was the same thing that you had saw on the screen. And I remember I went to them and I said, there's no way that anyone is going to be able to do any breakdowns of this game if you can't show me what is going on with all the other players on the field. And there was actually very good interactions at some levels. At some levels in that game, there was good interactions. But the way the replay was initially froze, you couldn't tell. When they bring the Great House patch in, there must have been 20 different replay angles to go from. But to talk about that camera angle specifically, they fell on their sword, is what they did. They came out and they wanted this first-person football perspective, and to their credit, I think when you talk about rewarding gameplay, that was a game where if you played one position and you made a play, whether it was an interception, whether it was a fumble recovery, whatever the case, you felt a sense of achievement that you can't get from the quote-unquote God mode camera. And I remember explaining to them that I understand that they wanted to create something different, but I think far too many people took the stance of Madden's camera angle versus what Backbreaker wanted to achieve with this first-person football. And I tried to drive home to them that it's not Madden's camera angle. This camera angle has been in just about every football game since 1996. This isn't something Madden created. This all of a sudden just became the industry standard. I mean, if you think back to 10-yard fight, those were almost entirely above the field. But when we started to go out to Game Day, Joe Montana, those kind of games, even not so much Joe Montana because it had that zoom-in camera.
Mm-hmm.
But that camera angle wasn't something Madden created. But they wanted that immersive first-person football, and to me, it worked. At times, it was very fun returning kicks. It was very fun running the ball. I was never a real big fan of throwing the ball. I like the fact that you could highlight the receivers and you could kind of read through a progression, but it just seemed like it lacked something, and I never really knew what it was. But it did, for what it's worth, it did actually accomplish the feeling of rewarding gameplay in a way that, to be honest with you, I've never felt from Madden where, you intercept the ball, the screen freezes, You get a little sound effect, it spins the screen, and now you're running the opposite direction that you were just playing in. Whereas with Backbreaker, you looked at everything the same exact way the entire play, no matter whether you were involved in the play or you were 15 yards away from it. Everything appeared the same, and it's not that way with Madden. It's not that way with any other football game.
So, what comes now? What happened after the fact? I know that they were talking about potential of Backbreaker 2, and then they focused exclusively on Tackle Alley for iOS. They did Backbreaker 1, then they had an upgrade, and then they had Backbreaker 2. And it was just so sad to see what could have possibly been had they released another football title. But I think just like with 2K8, nobody, they became box office poison at a certain point, and nobody wanted to touch them. What are your?
Well, I think what we learned from a game like that is it can impact the marketplace. I mean, I'll never be one to think that Madden didn't implement physics the year after because now we'd already seen it. I think it made an impact in football gaming. As far as a second console release, I can only tell you what I was told. And again, I don't know how much validity there is to this, but this came from multiple sources of people that worked in the game. It was my understanding that Backbreaker 2 was essentially completed as a console release. They had released Backbreaker Vengeance on mobile and had set a target of how many sales they needed on the mobile game to continue to explore a console option. And that number was very, very close, if not having been met. And then things just kind of took, political, I guess is the best way I could describe it, a political issue over the visions of the game. But I do know that the console version was not to include the first-person football perspective again. They were going to kind of do the panned-out camera, and that may have ultimately been part of what led to the demise of Backbreaker 2. But somewhere that game is actually completed, probably pending deletion on a USB or
Oh,
something to that case. But like I said, I don't know total validity to that, but I've spoke to enough people that I trust and believe that worked on that game where they have no reason to lie to me. That game was in fact done, could have been set to release, but the combination of either barely missing the numbers on Vengeance, and just the power struggle amongst the two producers, which I actually saw play out a few times in emails myself, tended to just dissolve the product. Basically, one of those things where it's my sandbox, and if you're not going to build the sandcastle I want, then you're not going to play in the sandbox anymore.
oh. Now, they just Natural Motion was acquired by Zynga let me guess, last year, or maybe a year and a half ago. But any chance for another? Do you think another Natural Motion based football game?
I would say no,
Oh,
only because
no.
those people have went their separate ways. Actually, it's ironic. A lot of people may or may not know this. When I went down to EA, of all the places you would meet someone, I had never actually been to EA before, since what was that? Probably 2013, I guess. The people from Natural Motion from 505 had actually came over to work on a completely separate product with EA. Some of them had never been in the States before, and neither one of us knew that the other was actually there. And we had a very long and detailed conversation about Backbreaker and the way things played out. I would say there was a little hostility there between, the competing gaming companies. You could still feel like, they felt like they could make a good product. But I distinctly remember he did not believe me that I was who I was. And I actually had to show him my driver's license to prove to him that it was in fact me, because he could not believe that they had never been in the States before. I'd never been to EA before. We had elected to go out that evening as a group to, I believe, like a TGI Fridays or something. And what are the chances? It has to be astronomical of two people meeting 3 years after collaborating together in such a weird way. But like I said, those people that worked on that game have scattered themselves throughout the industry, rightfully so. They're obviously very talented and detailed, hard workers. Basically concept that maybe they could all come back together, probably never a possibility.
Well, you know, they say magic happens at TGI Fridays.
Do they say that?
I've never heard that either.
I've never heard that.
That's probably not happening.
Flair, doesn't Flair happen at TGI Fridays with all the buttons?
They've been taking that flare out,
Do
so
they
I guess
do? Do they do endless apps?
they do endless bottomless fries, bottomless steak
No,
fries.
that's Red Robin.
Oh shoot, what am I saying? TGI Fridays. They do
You know
misery and
what?
mixed drinks.
See, this could be a great thing if there's someone that, manages or corporate level deals with Fridays. I can no longer distinguish between Fridays, Applebee's, Chili's,
Ruby
Ruby
Two
Tuesdays.
Tuesdays. There you go.
It's all like the same restaurant when I go in there. It's like I don't want to say it's mediocre food because I've had some decent food in those places, but I there's never one thing where I can sit there and say I have to go to this restaurant for this, other than possibly the queso dip at Chili's. That's really like the only time, like if I'll get a hankering for like queso dip, it'll be like queso dip from Chili's, which I'm sure someone is saying, God, that's god awful queso. And I agree, it is. But it has a flavor profile that when I want something, I can't go to another restaurant and get an equally mundane queso dip from them. So those restaurants, I think, even in Americana legend, have kind of diluted themselves to all being the same. But it's interesting that we can wrap this conversation up with two football games. If you go back and play Backbreaker and you play Madden, that actually were able to be very, very different in that same field.
You know, like my father used to say, always end strong. He's talking about TGI Fridays and Ruby Tuesdays. That's wonderful. Good job.
Well, we are going to be back again. We want you guys to please give suggestions to this pitiful time of your life where you've spent listening to this. Let us know what you would like to call it, other than stuff you don't want to listen to anymore. As always, go look at the links in the description. You can watch Neal gracefully play Backbreaker for the first time. That's recorded on a Fuji Pix 900, I believe. And then obviously we will be back in the week. I'll be back in a few days or whatever the case may be with more content.